Maribel Santos lived in a small village surrounded by rice fields that seemed to stretch to the edge of the world. The days there were slow, quiet, and all the same. Every morning, she woke to the sound of roosters and the smell of boiling rice. The air was thick with heat and the roads were dusty, but it was home. Her mother had passed away when she was young, and her father, once a strong farmer, now spent his days resting in the shade, his hands rough and his eyes tired. Maribel worked as a seamstress in a little corner shop beside the market. Her sewing machine was old and noisy, but her fingers moved fast and graceful, stitching hope into every piece of fabric. She made school uniforms, dresses for church, and sometimes wedding gowns for girls her age who were lucky enough to find love. Each time she finished a white gown, she felt a small ache inside her chest. She smiled when the brides came to pick up their dresses, pretending to share their joy. But deep down, she wished someone would look at her the way those grooms looked at their brides. At 27, she wasn't old, but in her village, people whispered that she was too late. Every family gathering turned into a reminder. Aunts asked softly, "When will it be your turn, Maribel?" And neighbors teased that she loved her sewing machine more than any man. She laughed with them, but when the laughter faded, she sat alone and wondered if she would ever find someone to share her small world with. One evening, after a long day of stitching, she sat outside her small house with her cousin Liza. They shared a plate of mangoes while watching children chase each other in the dusty street. Liza worked in the nearby city and had a small phone with internet. She showed Maribel pictures of her friends who had met foreigners online, men from America, Canada, and Australia. Some of them had already moved abroad, sending home photos of snowy streets and big houses. "You should try it, Bella," Liza said, using her nickname. "You're kind, you're pretty, and those men, they love simple, caring women. Maybe that's how you'll find your match." Maribel laughed at first, shaking her head. "Me, talk to a foreign man? Oh no, I can barely speak English," but Liza insisted. "You don't need perfect English. Just be yourself. There's a website like a pen pal thing, but for marriage. You write about yourself, and if someone likes you, they'll message you." That night, when everyone was asleep, Maribel couldn't stop thinking about it. She imagined herself in another land, maybe wearing a warm coat, maybe walking under falling snow. The idea was strange but also exciting. She had never left her province, never even been on an airplane. Could such a thing really happen to someone like her? The next week, she gathered her courage and went with Liza to an internet cafe in the nearby town. The computers were slow, and the air smelled of instant noodles and coffee. Her hands trembled as she typed her name and age into the form. "Describe yourself," the screen asked. She paused, thinking. What could she say? That she was small, quiet, and liked sewing? Would that sound boring? Liza encouraged her to write from the heart, so she did. She wrote, "My name is Maribel Santos. I am from the Philippines. I love simple things, sunsets, flowers, and making clothes. I hope to find a man who is kind, honest, and wants a family." She uploaded a photo of herself wearing her favorite blue dress. The light wasn't perfect and her smile was shy, but there was a sparkle in her eyes. Hope, just beginning to bloom. Days passed and Maribel almost forgot about the profile. Then one morning, she opened her email and found a message from a man named Thomas Green. He was from Montana, USA. He wrote in simple, polite English saying he had read her profile and liked her smile. He was 45, a widower with one grown son. He said he was lonely since his wife had passed and wanted to start over. His words were gentle, full of care, and even though she needed help from Liza to understand some phrases, Maribel felt something warm in her heart. They began writing each other every week. Thomas asked about her life, her work, her family. He told her about his home. A small town surrounded by mountains and endless fields where snow covered everything in winter. He sent pictures of his dog, Max, and his house, which looked huge compared to her tiny home. Sometimes he sent photos of the sky turning orange over the hills, and Maribel would reply with pictures of her own sunsets, golden light over green rice fields. It felt like two worlds touching through words and images. Months turned into a year. Their messages became longer, their jokes more natural. Maribel practiced her English every night, writing sentences in her notebook and reading them out loud. Her father teased her, saying, "You smile at that phone more than you smile at people." But he was happy to see her laugh again. Then one evening, a message came that made her heart race. Thomas wrote, "I want to meet you in person. I will come to the Philippines." Maribel couldn't believe it. She ran to Liza's house shouting, "He's coming! He's really coming!" They hugged, screamed, and danced around like children. For weeks, Maribel prepared. She bought a new dress with small pink flowers, learned how to bake banana bread, because Thomas said he loved sweets, and practiced greeting him in English. She even started saving every peso she could in case she needed to travel with him. Every night she looked at his picture on her phone and whispered, "Please let him be the one." When the day came, the whole village seemed to know. Neighbors peeked through windows and little children followed her to the bus stop, giggling and waving. "Good luck, Adabella," they shouted. Her heart beat fast as the bus drove toward the city. She had never been this far from home. She imagined what it would be like to hold Thomas's hand, to see snow for the first time, to have a house of her own. At the airport, she waited nervously, clutching a small sign with his name on it. When she finally saw him walking toward her, a tall man in a brown coat, his hair gray at the sides, her heart leapt. He smiled and waved, and she smiled back, tears in her eyes. For a moment she thought, this is it. This is where my new life begins. Thomas greeted her kindly, though she noticed a flicker of surprise in his face as he looked down at her. She barely reached his shoulder. Still, he helped her with her bag and said, "You look even prettier in person." Her heart soared at his words, and she didn't see the hesitation behind his smile. They spent 2 days together, walking through malls, eating local food, and talking as best they could. Maribel felt shy but happy. He was quiet, polite, and sometimes looked distracted. She told herself it was just the long flight. On the last night, he said softly, "I want to invite you to my home in Montana. I think we could start a life together there." Maribel felt like she could fly. She said yes through tears and laughter. He promised to take care of her, help her adjust, and make sure she felt at home. For the first time, she truly believed her dream was coming true. 2 months later, after a long wait and endless paperwork, she received her visa. Her whole village gathered to wish her farewell. Her father hugged her tightly, whispering, "Be brave, my little girl, and don't forget where you came from." She carried his words like a prayer as she boarded the plane, the first of her life. As the clouds floated below her, she pressed her face to the window and whispered, "Thank you, God, thank you for this chance." She didn't know what lay ahead, but in that moment her heart was full of hope. The sky stretched wide and open before her, and she believed with all her heart that love was waiting on the other side. The airplane landed with a small shake, and Maribel felt her stomach twist in excitement and fear. Through the tiny window, she saw snow for the first time in her life. It looked like soft white feathers falling from the sky. The air outside was cold and strange, and when she stepped out, her breath turned into small clouds. Everything was quiet and bright. She pulled her thin jacket tighter and smiled to herself. "I made it," she whispered. At the airport, she searched the crowd for Thomas. When she finally saw him, standing near the exit with his hands in his coat pockets, her heart skipped. He looked older than in his photos, but still kind. She waved shyly and he smiled back, walking toward her. For a moment, she felt like all her worries had melted away. He hugged her quickly and said, "You're here. Long flight, huh?" She nodded, too shy to say much. But as they stood there, Maribel noticed something in his eyes, something she couldn't name. He seemed polite, but not as warm as before. His smile faded fast, replaced by a small frown, as if he was thinking deeply about something he didn't want to say. Still, she told herself it was just the cold or maybe his tiredness from waiting. On the drive to his town, Maribel pressed her face to the window, amazed by the snow-covered trees and wide-open land. There were no small shops, no people walking in groups, no loud music from the streets, just quiet. The world outside looked peaceful but also lonely. Thomas talked a little, mostly about the weather and how far his town was from the city. His voice was calm but distant, like he was talking to a stranger. Maribel smiled, trying to start small conversations, but he often gave short answers. After hours of driving, they reached a small house surrounded by tall pine trees. It looked just like the pictures he had sent, but somehow colder. He carried her bag inside and showed her the living room. It had a big fireplace, soft chairs, and a picture of a woman on the wall. Thomas saw her looking at it and said quietly, "That was my wife, Anne. She passed 5 years ago." His voice softened for the first time that night, and Maribel nodded with respect. "I'm sorry," she said softly. He smiled weakly. "It's okay. Life goes on." Maribel wanted to comfort him, but she didn't know how. She felt like a guest in a place that still belonged to someone else. That night, she stayed in the small guest room. The bed was soft and clean, but she couldn't sleep. The cold air touched her skin and the silence pressed around her. She missed the sound of crickets, her father's snoring, and even the street dogs barking back home. She held her phone close to her heart and whispered, "I hope I can belong here." The next morning, Thomas made coffee and toast. He was kind but quiet. Maribel tried to help by washing the dishes, but he said, "You can rest. You must be tired." His tone was polite, but it made her feel useless. Later, he offered to take her to town so she could see the shops. As they walked through the small grocery store, people looked at her curiously. Some smiled, others just stared. She felt out of place, like a small bird that had landed in the wrong season. That night over dinner, Thomas seemed uneasy. He asked her about her family again, about her height when she was younger, about whether she had ever been sick. The questions felt odd, but she answered kindly. Finally, he sighed and said something that made her chest tighten. "Maribel, you're shorter than I thought," he said, not looking at her. She froze, unsure how to reply. "Oh, yes," she said softly, forcing a smile. "I'm small. My mother was small too." He nodded but didn't smile back. The silence that followed was heavy. "I just didn't realize it before," he added after a while, his fork tapping the plate. "In the photos, you looked taller." Maribel's hands trembled under the table. She wanted to tell him that height didn't matter, that she was kind and loving, and that she had come all this way for him. But her throat felt dry. She managed to whisper, "I hope that's okay." He didn't answer right away. He looked away and said, "You're very sweet, Maribel. I need to think." That night, she cried quietly under the blanket, careful not to make a sound. The snow outside kept falling, covering everything in white, as if the world was trying to hide her sadness. She prayed, asking for strength, telling herself maybe he was just shocked, that maybe tomorrow would be better. The next morning, Thomas was already dressed when she came out of her room. His face was serious, his eyes tired. He asked her to sit down. "Maribel," he began, "I've been thinking a lot. You're a wonderful person, but I'm not sure we're a good match." Her heart dropped. "Did I do something wrong?" she asked, her voice trembling. "No, not at all," he said quickly. "You're kind, you're polite, and I'm grateful you came all this way. But I didn't expect you to be, well, this small. It's silly, I know, but it matters to me. I'm sorry." She stared at him, trying to understand. The words felt sharp, though he said them softly. "You mean because I'm short?" she whispered. He nodded, avoiding her eyes. "I guess so. I just don't feel the connection I hoped for." Tears filled her eyes. "But we talked for so long. You said you loved me." "I thought I did," he said, his voice low. "But things feel different in person." For a long time, neither of them spoke. The only sound was the clock ticking on the wall. Finally, he stood up and said, "I'll help you get a hotel room in town, and I'll pay for your ticket home. You shouldn't worry about anything." Maribel couldn't move. Her hands shook, her heart aching. She wanted to beg him to give her a chance, to tell him that love wasn't about height or looks. But she knew his heart had already closed. The man she thought she knew from his letters wasn't the same man standing before her now. A few hours later, she found herself sitting alone in a small hotel room near the bus station. Her luggage sat by the door, and outside the snow fell harder. She looked at her reflection in the mirror, small, tired, with eyes full of dreams that had just been broken. She whispered to herself, "He didn't even try to know me." She opened her phone and read their old messages. "I can't wait to meet you," one of his texts said. "I think we were meant to find each other." She smiled sadly, tears rolling down her cheeks. "Maybe we were never meant to," she said softly. For 3 days she stayed in that hotel, afraid to tell her father what had happened. She didn't want to break his heart too. She told him she was fine, that Thomas was just busy, and that she would come home soon. But inside she felt lost. The dream she had built for more than a year had vanished in one night. On the third morning, she ran out of money. She had only a few dollars left, enough for some bread and tea. As she sat in the small cafe downstairs trying to keep warm, a waitress named Nancy noticed her. Nancy was older, with soft eyes and a kind smile. "You're not from here, are you?" she asked gently. Maribel shook her head and tried to hide her sadness, but tears came anyway. Nancy sat with her and said, "It's okay, dear. Tell me what happened." And so for the first time, Maribel told someone everything, from the village to the letters to the rejection. Nancy listened without judging, holding her hand the whole time. When Maribel finished, Nancy said, "You're brave. You came here with hope, and that's something special. Don't let one man make you forget your worth." That was the first time Maribel smiled again in days. Maybe her story wasn't over yet. Maybe it was just starting in a way she never expected. Maribel sat on the edge of the small hotel bed, her suitcase open beside her. The air inside the room was cold, even with the heater on. The clock on the wall ticked loudly, reminding her how slowly time was passing. She had not slept much since Thomas left her there. Each night felt endless, filled with thoughts that hurt more than words could say. She still could not believe that her dream had ended before it even began. She looked at her reflection in the small mirror near the window. Her eyes were red and swollen, and her lips trembled each time she tried to smile. She whispered to herself, "Maybe it's my fault. Maybe I wasn't good enough." But deep down, she knew it wasn't just about height or looks. It was about something inside him, something that refused to see her heart. Her small bag held everything she owned in that country. Her passport, some clothes, a few pesos, and a little cross necklace that her father had given her before she left. "Keep this close," he had said, "and remember that you are never alone." She held it tightly in her hand now, hoping his words were still true. For 2 more days, Maribel stayed in that room, living on bread, tea, and hoped that somehow things would change. She checked her phone again and again, but there were no new messages from Thomas. She sent him one last note, "I understand. Thank you for everything." He never replied. By the 3rd morning, she realized she couldn't stay there anymore. Her money was almost gone. She went down to the hotel lobby and asked the man at the desk if there was any place nearby where she could find work. He looked surprised and said, "You're not from here, are you?" When she shook her head, he sighed. "Jobs are hard to find in this town, but maybe you can try the diner down the street. The owner is kind." The diner was a small place with red seats and the smell of coffee and eggs filling the air. Maribel walked in quietly, clutching her bag, unsure of what to say. Behind the counter stood a woman with short gray hair and kind eyes. Nancy, the same woman who had spoken to her before. When she saw Maribel again, she smiled warmly. "You came back," she said. "I was hoping you would." Maribel nodded shyly. I'm looking for work. I can clean or help in the kitchen, anything." Nancy looked at her for a moment, then said softly, "You don't need to explain, sweetheart. I can tell you're trying your best. I can't promise much pay, but you can help me clean tables and wash dishes, and I'll make sure you get food." Tears filled Maribel's eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. And so that became her new routine. Every morning she came to the diner early and cleaned tables, washed dishes, and helped carry trays. The work was hard, but it gave her something to hold on to. She didn't have friends yet, and she missed her father terribly, but at least she had a place to go, and someone who cared. Nancy often talked to her while they worked. "You remind me of my daughter," she would say. "She moved away years ago. I haven't seen her in a long time." Sometimes Nancy brought her old sweaters or small snacks to take back to her room. Slowly, Maribel began to feel less alone, but the nights were still the hardest. When she returned to the hotel, she would sit by the window and look at the snow falling outside. The world was quiet and the cold made her fingers numb. She would write in her small notebook letters to her father that she never sent. "Papa, I am safe. The place is cold but pretty. I am working now, cleaning a diner. Please don't worry about me." Sometimes she would stop and cry, the tears falling onto the paper. "If only I could go home," she whispered. But her pride stopped her. She didn't want her father or her neighbors to see her as a failure. She wanted to make something of herself, even here, in this foreign land. Weeks passed, and she learned to move through the cold days with quiet strength. She learned how to use the washing machine in the hotel laundry room, how to walk carefully on icy roads, and how to smile again, even when her heart still ached. One morning, while she was cleaning the diner tables, a customer dropped his wallet. Maribel picked it up and ran after him, calling out, "Sir, you forgot this." The man turned around. He was tall, with kind brown eyes and hands rough from hard work. He smiled and said, "Thank you. Most people wouldn't bother." Maribel shook her head. "It's okay. It's your wallet," he laughed. "Well, I owe you a coffee at least." She smiled shyly but didn't accept. "It's fine," she said, her accent soft but clear. The man introduced himself. I'm Ethan. I work at the auto shop down the road. Maybe I'll see you around. Maribel nodded politely and went back to work, not knowing that this small meeting would soon change her life. The next day, Ethan came back. He sat at the same table and ordered coffee again. When Nancy served him, he looked toward Maribel and smiled. You're the girl who found my wallet, he said. Thank you again, she smiled. It's okay. I'm glad you got it back. They talked for a few minutes while she cleaned nearby tables. He asked where she was from, and when she told him, his eyes softened. That's far away, he said. It must be hard being here all alone. She nodded. Sometimes. But people here are kind, he smiled. Not everyone is. But some try. Ethan kept coming to the diner every few days, always sitting in the same spot. He liked to talk. About his work, about the weather, about his little sister who lived in another town. He spoke gently, never asking too many questions. Maribel started to look forward to those small conversations. For the first time in a long while, she laughed again. But still, there were nights when the pain of the past came rushing back. Sometimes she dreamed of the moment Thomas told her she was too small. The words echoed in her mind like a bell that wouldn't stop ringing. She would wake up crying, holding her necklace, whispering, "Why wasn't I enough?" One night, Nancy found her sitting alone in the back of the diner after closing. You okay, sweetheart? She asked. Maribel wiped her eyes quickly. I'm fine. Just tired. Nancy sat beside her and said, I've seen that look before. You can tell me. So Maribel told her everything, about Thomas, about the trip, about the hotel, about how lost she felt. When she finished, Nancy sighed and said gently, He didn't see your worth. But that's his loss, not yours. You're stronger than you think, Maribel. Look how far you've come already. Her words warmed Maribel's heart more than the hot cocoa she was holding. That night, for the first time in many days, she slept peacefully. As the weeks turned into months, she began to save a little money. It wasn't much, but enough for her to buy small things, a thicker coat, better shoes, and once a pretty notebook where she wrote down her thoughts. She still missed home, but she no longer felt broken. Slowly, she was building a new life, one small piece at a time. Sometimes when she walked to work and the morning light touched the snow, she smiled to herself. She didn't know what the future held, but she was beginning to believe that life still had surprises, and maybe even love, waiting for her somewhere. Her heart, once filled with sorrow, now carried quiet hope. She had been rejected for something she couldn't change, but through that pain, she was discovering something deeper, her own strength. And though she didn't know it yet, the next chapter of her life was already unfolding, quietly, like a new sunrise behind a long, dark night. The winter slowly began to fade. The snow outside the diner melted into clear streams that ran along the roads. Tiny flowers started to push through the cold ground, and the air began to smell fresh again. For Maribel, it felt like the world was also slowly thawing, just like her heart. By now, she had worked at the diner for almost 3 months. The place had become more than just a workplace. It was like a small world of safety. The regular customers greeted her kindly. Nancy treated her like a daughter, and she knew every sound in that little cafe. The bell on the door, the hiss of the coffee machine, and the soft chatter of people coming and going. Every morning she would open the curtains of her small hotel room and whisper a short prayer of thanks. Life was still hard, but not empty anymore. She had a routine, a purpose, and even laughter again, mostly because of one person, Ethan. He came to the diner almost every morning before work. Sometimes he brought a bag of apples for Nancy and Maribel, sometimes a small box of donuts. He always had oil on his hands from the auto shop, and his jacket smelled faintly of gasoline, but there was something calm and honest about him. Morning, sunshine, he would say with a grin, and Maribel would laugh. The first time he said that, she had blushed so hard that Nancy had to tease her about it for days. Ethan wasn't like Thomas. He didn't make big promises, didn't talk about saving her or changing her life. He just treated her like a person, someone who mattered. When she talked, he listened. When she smiled, he smiled back. One afternoon, as she was sewing a torn seat cushion for one of the diner's booths, Ethan came in holding a bundle of uniforms. Hey, think you could help me with these? He asked. The sleeves keep tearing. The boys at the shop are rough on them. Maribel nodded. Of course, I can fix them tonight. He smiled. You sure? I can pay you later. She shook her head. No need. You already bring donuts, that's enough. He laughed, a deep warm sound that filled the room. You're too kind, Maribel. But I'll still pay you. That evening, after her shift, she took the uniforms back to her room and began stitching. Each thread she pulled reminded her of home, her small sewing shop, her old machine, and the sound of her father's voice. She thought about how strange life could be, how one door could close so painfully, and another could quietly open when she least expected it. When she returned the uniforms the next day, Ethan said, Perfect job. Better than new. Then he smiled shyly and added, There's a fair this weekend. Music, food, small rides. Would you like to go? Just as friends, of course. Maribel froze for a moment, unsure what to say. It had been so long since anyone had asked her to go anywhere for fun. Her first instinct was to say no, to stay safe behind her walls. But Nancy, who was standing nearby, gave her a playful nudge. Go on, girl. You deserve a little fun. So she nodded. Okay, I'll go. That weekend, Ethan picked her up in his old blue truck. The sky was wide and clear, the fields bright with spring colors. The fairground was full of laughter, music, and the smell of fried food. Maribel's heart felt light for the first time in months. They walked through the stalls, sharing cotton candy and laughing at the silly games. Ethan tried to win her a stuffed bear at one of the booths, missing the target again and again until they both burst out laughing. Guess I'm better with engines than with these things, he said. It's okay, Maribel replied, smiling. I don't need a prize. But when they walked away, one of the workers handed Ethan a small keychain shaped like a heart. Here, man. You tried hard. Give this to her. Ethan thanked him and handed it to Maribel. For luck, he said softly. She held it close to her chest. Thank you. As the sun set, they sat on a bench watching children run past with balloons. The air smelled of popcorn and sweet lemonade. Maribel looked up at the sky, painted in orange and gold, and whispered, It's so beautiful. Ethan nodded. Yeah, it is. You know, I think you make this town a little brighter. She turned to him, surprised. Me? Yeah, he said. You've been through a lot, haven't you? But you still smile. That's rare. She looked down at her hands. Smiling is easier than crying, she said quietly. He nodded slowly. Maybe. But I think your smile means something. It means you still believe in good things. For a long moment they sat in silence, listening to the distant laughter. The wind brushed against Maribel's hair, and she felt something warm and soft inside her chest. Something that she hadn't felt since before Thomas, before the heartbreak, before everything. When Ethan dropped her off that night, he said, Thanks for coming, Maribel. I had a great time. She smiled. Me too. After that, they saw each other more often. Sometimes he would stop by the diner after work. Sometimes he would walk her home when it was dark. He told her about his life, how he had grown up, fixing cars with his father, how he wanted to open his own shop someday, how he had been hurt before too, but was still learning to hope again. Maribel shared her own dreams. I want to open a sewing shop, she said once. A small one, maybe near the market. He grinned. You'd do great. Everyone in town would come to you. One evening, as they were walking down a quiet street, snowflakes began to fall again, soft and slow. Ethan laughed and held out his hand. Look, it's the last snow of the season. Maribel looked up, her eyes wide. It's so pretty, she whispered. He watched her for a moment, her small face lit by the streetlights, her eyes full of wonder. Then he said gently, You make everything look pretty. Her heart beat faster, but she didn't look away. She just smiled, shy and warm. That night, when she got home, she sat by the window and looked at the small, heart-shaped keychain he had given her. She realized that she no longer felt lost. She wasn't the same woman who had cried in that hotel room months ago. She had found kindness again, not in big promises or grand gestures, but in simple moments that made her feel seen. Over the next few weeks, life began to feel full again. Nancy teased her often, saying, "Our little Maribel's got someone who makes her glow." Maribel would blush and deny it, but deep down, she knew her heart had already started to open again. One afternoon, Ethan surprised her by bringing a small sewing machine to the diner. "Found it at a garage sale," he said with a grin. "Needs a little fixing, but I thought you might like it." Maribel gasped. "For me?" He nodded. "You can start your shop one day. This is your first tool." Tears filled her eyes. "Ethan, thank you." He smiled softly. "You've mended enough clothes for others. Time you started mending your own dreams." That night, Maribel sat in her room, touching the machine gently, running her fingers over the metal. She thought about all the people she had met, the kindness of Nancy, the patience of Ethan, the strength she had discovered inside herself. For the first time since she had left her home, she didn't feel like a stranger in this country. She felt like she belonged. She still missed her father and her village, but her heart had grown in new directions, stretching wide and strong like the sky outside her window. And though she didn't know what tomorrow would bring, she felt ready to face it. Because this time she knew that love wasn't about perfection, or appearances, or promises. It was about kindness, steady, simple, and real. The kind of love that grows quietly like a seed under the snow, waiting for the sun to shine again. Morning light poured through the thin curtains of Maribel's small room, warming her face as she slowly opened her eyes. For the first time in a long while, she woke up smiling. The sewing machine Ethan had given her sat beside the window, glowing softly in the golden light. She ran her fingers over it each morning, whispering a quiet thank you to God for the strange, beautiful path that had led her here. It had been almost a year since she had first come to America. When she thought about that frightened girl who had stepped off the airplane, holding on to her dreams and her courage, she could hardly believe how far she had come. The pain she once carried still lived inside her, but now it had turned into strength, a soft kind of strength that gave her peace instead of sorrow. Her days were busy now. She still helped Nancy at the diner, but she had also started her own small sewing business in the corner of her rented room. The townspeople brought her clothes to fix, curtains to hem, and sometimes wedding gowns to sew. Word spread quickly about the little lady with the golden hands. Each stitch she made carried a piece of her heart. Ethan helped her every step of the way. He built her a small wooden table to hold her fabrics and helped hang a sign by the window that read, "Maribel's Stitching Corner." Every time she looked at it, she felt proud, not just because of the work, but because it reminded her that she had built this life herself. One evening, Ethan stopped by after closing his shop. He brought her a box of pastries and sat across from her as she worked on a blue dress. "You never stop, do you?" he teased. Maribel smiled. "Sewing makes me calm. It feels like I'm putting the world back together, one thread at a time." He leaned back in his chair, watching her quietly. "You've changed this place, you know. Everyone in town talks about you. You make people smile." She laughed softly. "I think that's Nancy's doing, not mine." "No," Ethan said gently. "It's yours. You bring light wherever you go." Her cheeks turned pink. She looked down, focusing on the fabric, but her heart was beating faster. The silence between them felt warm like a gentle blanket. After a while, Ethan stood and said, "Come on. Let's take a walk. The sunset's beautiful tonight." They walked down the quiet street, the air cool and soft. The sky was painted in shades of gold, orange, and pink. Birds were returning to their nests, and the whole town glowed under the fading sun. Maribel took a deep breath, feeling a sense of calm she hadn't known in years. Ethan stopped near the edge of the road where wildflowers grew. He picked one and handed it to her. "Do you remember the first time we met?" he asked. She smiled. "Of course. You dropped your wallet. You said you owed me a coffee," he laughed. "And you never let me buy it." "Well," she said playfully, "you kept bringing donuts." That was enough. They both laughed. And for a moment, the world felt perfect and quiet, peaceful, full of small, beautiful things. Then Ethan took a deep breath and said softly, "Maribel, I need to tell you something." Her heart began to race. "What is it?" He looked nervous but calm. "I never believed I'd meet someone like you. You came here with nothing, and yet you gave so much, to me, to everyone around you. You remind me what kindness means." He paused, then added, "I don't want to just see you at the diner. I want you beside me every day. I want to build a life with you, if you'll have me." For a moment, Maribel couldn't speak. Her hands trembled and her eyes filled with tears. She thought of her journey, the heartbreak, the cold nights, the endless loneliness, and now this. This moment, this man, this love that had grown not from promises but from patience and care. She smiled through her tears. "Ethan," she whispered, "you already gave me a new life. I'd be proud to share it with you." He smiled, his eyes bright. Then it settled. He reached for her hand, and together they stood under the soft pink sky, the air filled with the quiet hum of evening. Months passed, and life moved gently forward. They got married in a small church surrounded by friends. Nancy baked the wedding cake, and the townspeople filled the pews with flowers. Maribel wore a simple dress that she made herself, cream-colored, soft and flowing. Ethan wore a gray suit, his hands shaking as he placed the ring on her finger. When the pastor said, "You may kiss the bride," Ethan whispered, "You're my greatest blessing." And in that moment, Maribel felt tears fall down her cheeks. Not from sadness, but from the deep joy of knowing she had found a love that saw her heart, not her height, not her flaws, only her soul. After the wedding, they built a small house near the edge of town. Ethan opened his own auto shop, and Maribel moved her sewing corner there, next to a window that looked out over the open fields. Every morning she would sit by that window, sewing as the sun rose while Ethan worked outside fixing engines. Sometimes, when the wind blew gently through the curtains, she would pause and think of her past, her little village, her father's tired smile, the sound of the roosters, and the warmth of the sun on her face. She still wrote letters to her father, and once she saved enough, she brought him to live with them for a few months. He loved Ethan immediately, saying, "You take care of my little girl. She's small, but she carries the biggest heart." Life wasn't perfect. There were still days of worry and long hours of work, but they faced everything together. In time, their home became full of laughter, music, and even the soft cries of their baby daughter, whom they named Hope, because she had come into their lives when they needed hope the most. Maribel often sat by the crib, watching the baby sleep, her tiny hands curled like petals. Ethan would come up behind her, wrap his arms around her, and whisper, "Can you believe all this started because you found my wallet?" Maribel would smile and say, "No, it started because someone cared enough to listen." Sometimes she thought back to Thomas, not with anger but with understanding. His rejection had hurt deeply, but if it hadn't happened, she would never have found her way to this town, to Nancy, to Ethan, to this life. Pain had been her teacher, showing her that the heart can heal, and that love, when it's real, is never measured by appearances but by kindness. One summer afternoon, Maribel stood outside her house holding her daughter in her arms. The sky stretched wide above her, blue and endless. She felt the soft breeze on her face and whispered, "Thank you." She thought of the girl she once was, scared, uncertain, sitting in that cold hotel room. And she smiled. That girl had survived, learned, and grown. She had been rejected for being too small, yet she had found a love larger than any she could have dreamed. Her life was proof that broken dreams can still lead to beautiful places, and that sometimes the smallest people carry the biggest courage. As the sun began to set, Ethan called out from the porch, "Dinner's ready!" Maribel laughed, kissed her daughter's forehead, and walked back toward the house. The sky above her glowed in shades of orange and gold, wide and beautiful, like love itself. Inside, laughter echoed through their home, warm, gentle, and full of peace. Maribel looked at Ethan, at their child, and whispered softly, "This is my forever." And in that simple moment, surrounded by everything she once prayed for, she finally understood. Love was never about how tall someone stood beside you, but about how deep they stood with you when the world turned cold. Her love wasn't just wide as the sky. It was endless.